Avery Johnson is no longer a hidden gem. He is a certified Heisman dark horse candidate. And if you're still sleeping on this Kansas State quarterback or the entire team heading into 2025, this might be your final wake-up call.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. It's never a bad time to let you know that it's been 6,053 days since Kansas defeated Kansas State in a football game. What rivalry really is there in this conversation? But today we're going to talk Avery Johnson. We're going to talk Kansas State as a whole, and then we have some non-conference release times to get into. Is Avery Johnson the most dangerous quarterback in the Big 12? Or are we buying too much hype? Let me know. Drop your takes in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you believe this is the year for the Wildcats. Joel Klatt listed his top 10 quarterback list just recently, and Avery Johnson was nowhere to be found. He's not in the media's top 10. He's a plus 6,500 in Heisman odds, and to me, he's about to prove every single one of them wrong this season. Last season, well over 3,300 in total yards, 32 touchdowns, and now he's got the keys to a Kansas State offense that is completely loaded. Last year, through the air, had 2,700 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Yes, I understand the interceptions is something that you have to look at, you have to worry about, but I think they are going to make a huge step forward into this season. When I talk about the wide receiver group as a whole, how I think that's going to improve and help Avery Johnson, the size is just one thing. I think that the overall wide receiver room is a great aspect to have as well. And when you look at some of these other Heisman Trophy winners or candidates, if you even will, you don't even have to talk about just the winners. If you're just a candidate, even if you don't get to go to New York and you're just one of the ones that just missed a finalist, you had a great season. If you're even being talked about being a Heisman Trophy candidate, a dark horse, in my opinion, you didn't do it by yourself. You had a great surrounding cast, and I think that's what Avery Johnson is going to have this coming season for Kansas State. Dylan Edwards, I think, is going to have a great season. We haven't talked about him enough on this show. I think that's going to change next week. And then you talk about this wide receiver room, and I don't even get to include the tight ends really in this one, which we all know how great that room is. Led the entire country in red zone touchdowns last year. I don't see that changing too much. Maybe they won't lead the country, and it's not because of a production standpoint or a skill standpoint. It's just because there will be so many other options for Avery Johnson to not have to just focus and worry and on the tight end position when they get to inside the 20. You got those tall wide receivers in Jaron Bradley and Jared Tibbs. You still have Jace Brown. You have the electric Lincoln Cure, which who knows what we're going to see from him, but it should be very exciting on the field. There's just a lot of things to like about Avery Johnson, and I'm sick of this respect personally. When we talk about these type of Big 12 quarterback power rankings, or if we talk about the entire quarterbacks for top 10, these are the top 10 quarterbacks Joel Klatt says. 25K. Look, I understand that one. I understand he deserves to be on the list, and Clemson's bringing back some of the, I think there's no other team that's bringing back more returning starters than Clemson. So if I'm going to go off my own type of thought process here, saying you can't do it alone, it makes a lot of sense that Cade Klubnik's towards the top here. But then he has Arch Manning at number 2. And other than his last name and what we have seen small flashes of from his high school tape and maybe just a few plays when he was with Texas under Steve Sarkisian, he hasn't really proven anything. There is no proof that Arch Manning is going to be a good quarterback in this league other than the fact that his last name is Manning. That's it. And I hope he's great. And I'd love for the narrative to continue, because how cool would that be? I'm a huge fan of Peyton Manning. I love what he did in Indianapolis and Denver over his career. Huge fan of his old school Papa John commercials, right? My forehead might not be as big as his, and you'll never know because I usually wear a hat. But Arch Manning, it just hasn't proved it. John Mateer comes in at 3rd. He's transferred from Washington State. Who knows what Oklahoma looks like this year? Sam Levitt at 4th. We've had the conversation with Richie Bradshaw. Could be seen as the top Big 12 quarterback in the league. He thinks it's also a conversation that he could be seen as the top dual threat quarterback in the Big 12. That's absolutely false, and there's no way Avery Johnson takes that award with flying colors. Just to round out the rest of it here, because there's no way that Avery Johnson should not be on this list. Drew Aller at number 5 from Penn State. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU at 6. DJ Lagway, who dealt with injuries and in my opinion still pretty raw, at number 7 from Florida. Lenoris Sellers from South Carolina at 8. Luke Altmaier from Illinois at 9. And Carson Beck, who transferred out of Georgia to go to Miami, at number 10, who might just be getting that number we saw from Cam Ward getting drafted first overall in the NFL draft out of Miami last year. There are at least 3 players on this list that Avery Johnson should be over. I'm not saying he needs to be number 1, because I said he will be a dark horse candidate for the Heisman. If I said he was a clear favorite for the Heisman, then he would be number 1 on this list, or 2 at the very smallest. He deserves to be in this top 10 conversation, though. And I think he should be somewhere between 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I think that's a fair argument to make. I'm not saying he's should be seen right now as the top quarterback heading into 2025. I'm not saying that. I'm a Big 12 believer. I'm a Kansas State Wildcat believer. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And I truly believe that Avery Johnson is going to have one of the best seasons in college football in 2025. But based off what you had last year and the 10 interceptions, some of the issues that he did with throwing the football show that he does have some work to do. I think that changed this offseason. I think now you are going from the quarterback that was replacing Will Howard. You are the first quarterback to do so. It was your first season under the center. It's no longer the replacement. It is now Avery Johnson's team. And I think it's going to be a different type of quarterback we see in 2025 with him in the helm in year 2. I truly do. I think we're going to see more of a dual threat. I think he's going to be able to, and I think he's going to flourish under Matt Wells, under him as the offensive coordinator, the only offensive coordinator on the staff. Speed and size help out Avery Johnson. Oh, and he got even faster. Part of the 23-mile-an-hour club this offseason. Lots of things to be excited about for Avery Johnson, and I just don't understand why they're not seeing it, why the national media isn't seeing it. Is it because he's a Kansas State quarterback? A team that just went to the Big 12 championship just a few years ago was also slept on as soon as they won it. They immediately started talking about TCU yet again. But is that why? Is that why we're not getting that type of love? I'm not sure. I'll end it with this, talking about Avery Johnson being a dark horse candidate, because I truly do think he's going to be. He's seen as, like I said, a plus 6,500. That's 29th best in the Heisman odds. There are plenty of other quarterbacks above him. Let him be the dark horse. I saw this really interesting stat on Twitter. I think I've said it before on this show, but it's worth mentioning again. Since 2000, quarterbacks as a freshman or sophomore with 2,700 passing yards or more, 25 or more passing touchdowns, 10 or fewer interceptions, just makes the cut there, 600 plus rushing yards, or 7 and more rushing touchdowns, to also win 9 or more games for a Power 4/Power 5 school. I know it's a lot there, but the list of the players that are involved with all of those, there's only a small list. Avery Johnson makes the list. Drake May also did in 2022. He's the quarterback from the New England Patriots, top 5 draft pick a few years ago. Lamar Jackson in 2016 won the Heisman in 2016. Obviously, we know who Lamar Jackson is, multiple-time MVP of the NFL. J.T. Barrett from Ohio State in 2014. Marcus Mariota in 2013 also won the Heisman. Johnny Manziel in 2012 also won the Heisman. And Tim Tebow in 2007 also won the Heisman. Avery Johnson joined that list last year in a year where people think that he is not a good quarterback in this league. He's only going to get better this year. Now that he has a full, consistent system, a better supporting staff around him, and you're saying that last year was bad when you put it up against a list like that? If last year was bad, then we are talking historical seasons incoming for Avery Johnson in Kansas State. Talk me into it. And for somehow, some way, Kansas State is still seen as an underrated team. Now, FanDuel odds are getting a little high. We're starting to see them rise towards the top on that one, which is exciting. It's very interesting. I actually stopped by earlier this week with Spencer McLaughlin over at Locked On College Football to talk about just that. We'll have that conversation right after this on Locked On Kansas State. Well, before we do so, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's game-winning shots, a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. The Eastern Conference and Western Conference finals are wrapping up. We are heading into the NBA finals, and it's going to be absolutely electric, and FanDuel makes it easier to stay in the game before tip-off and even during the live game itself. Player props, performance trends, same game parlays, you name it, FanDuel has you covered every play to win smart and win big. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. And if that first $5 bet wins, you can get $200 instantly in bonus bets. So make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Are we overlooking Kansas State in the Big 12? Not if you check the odds over at FanDuel, of course. There's currently a four-way tie for the betting favorite. The Wildcats are in there, Baylor, Arizona State, and Texas Tech. So where should Kansas State fall? Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State is here to discuss just that. So do you think that's right? Christian, would you, if you were setting at Christian Sportsbook, the Big 12 championship odds, would you have a four-way tie, and where would you rank Kansas State?
Well, first off, that would sound like a pretty religious type of betting site right there. Maybe I should change that name. But overall, yeah, I mean, four-way tie. Look, it's tough to weed out who's going to be at the top of the Big 12, who's going to be at the bottom. If you look at any type of power conference, it's the parity is insane. I mean, look what happened last year with Arizona State. No one expected them to be there. In 2022, when TCU went to the national championship, the media poll, they had them ranked 7th. That was the year Kansas State won the Big 12 championship, let I remind you. But Kansas State is going to be the top of the Big 12. They are going to be one of the teams that finish off heading up, fighting for Dr. Pepper. It will happen, Spencer, and I'm going to put that out on record. Now, I've also gone on record, thought it was going to be BYU. Now, that might change just a little bit after what has been going on in the recent type of headlines. But Kansas State is going to be overlooked heading into the new year, and I think it'll be easily taken away fast after they take care of Iowa State in Dublin. But when you have a 7-1 start last year, and then when the wheels fall off at not a tough team, but a Houston team, like the wheels fell off against Houston, Spencer, that was a bad time for the wheels to fall off. A lot of people are going to start throwing that hate towards guys like Avery Johnson, saying he doesn't have what it takes to be a Big 12 quarterback. So not only are they going to be overlooked, they're going to have chips on their shoulder. The retention is so high of this team. Momentum's never been stronger, in my personal opinion. And I think they're going to make a lot of people eat their words and potentially lose their checkbooks if they go ahead and bet against them with our friends over at FanDuel.
The reason that I frame the discussion that way of them being overlooked, even though they're tied for the best odds in the Big 12, is there's nothing for, I think, casual college football fans or even engaged ones to latch onto with Kansas State. It's just kind of, they're good. It reminds me very much of a team that's closer to the top of the Big 12 title odds than you might expect, Utah, in the old Pac-12, RIP, where they're just steady, just solid. They're just good every single year. They're always there. They're in the mix. And it feels like a breakthrough, which certainly came a couple of years ago, is bound to happen again. But you look at what the rest of the top of the Big 12 kind of looks like. Arizona State, big momentum, story of the year in the conference, winning the league, reigning champs. They've got recruiting momentum. Texas Tech has got a bunch of money going into the program. They've got a top 5 national transfer portal class. Like, that's an easy thing to get to. And I mean, frankly, I'm surprised Baylor is that high. I think that's a bit of an overreaction. I would put Kansas State above them if I were to make Big 12 power rankings. But do you think that's the reason? Is Kansas State isn't always the noisiest program, which isn't a bad thing. But they're not always the noisy. They're not always giving people a reason to pay attention to what's happening in Manhattan.
Yeah, it's one of those spots where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, I guess. And I think you are a spot where you're not talked about enough. But if even when you won the Big 12 championship in 2022, they were completely forgot about. It went right to TCU yet again. Max Duggan's story. It wasn't ever about everything that happened with Kansas State. So yeah, they're easily forgotten, but doesn't mean they're a good program. Chris Kleiman has done a great job taking over for Bill Snyder, and it's just continued on this great legacy for this a very long time. Kansas State has had good football for a very long time, and they get to continue that this year. Now, look, when you talk about some of those other teams, you talk about Arizona State, who has recruiting momentum. I would argue that Kansas State has just as much recruiting momentum. They've had probably one of the best recruiting classes in program history this past season, and they most definitely had, and I apologize in advance since you are a Locked On Oregon fan, they brought in Lincoln Cure, which is their top recruit in program history. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. That's why I keep saying the momentum has never been stronger with this program. Yes, they had a terrible bowl game last year where they had to face Rutgers in the Ray Bowl. After starting 7-1, you didn't want that to happen. You wanted to go to the college football playoffs. You wanted to go in the Big 12 championship. You wanted to have those type of things to hang your shoulder on heading into this new year. But Avery Johnson and the rest of that team made the most of it. They had a great comeback win against Rutgers. They had the recruiting class. Retention was super strong, something that they did not expect to happen, at least in my mind, I didn't, after the wheels falling off towards the end of the season. And although some of these recruiting rankings have Kansas State super low on the recruiting rankings, a lot of these players are going to be really good players right away. JB Nelson from Penn State, he's going to be a day one offensive lineman that is probably going to be an NFL draft pick, top 100 draft pick next season.
So talk more about this Kansas State roster, because I think you have some good ones to contend with in the Big 12. I don't think there's a world beater in this conference. I think that on paper, you probably give the edge to Texas Tech. I think Arizona State certainly deserves to be in the fold, but nobody had a better offseason than Texas Tech. Like they have won the Big 12 offseason, and for whatever that is worth, and I don't think it's ever a bad thing to be a program that's committed to winning. I know, hot take. It's okay, even if it doesn't work out every single time. Where would you stack up K-State's roster in relation to the rest of the league?
Well, turns out U.S. dollar is not actually paper. So when you're looking at teams on paper, I don't know if you should look at Texas Tech, because that is a team that has spent a lot of money, no doubt. But I know we're a football show here, but if you want to look at the basketball program of Kansas State, spending money does not mean absolutely anything at all.
No, but they're going and spending it again.
But they're going to do it again. And
because of what you got no other option. What else are you going to do? Not spend it?
You're 100% right. And you can't take it with you when you go. I've heard that. I think that was a country song. I'm sure it is. If not, I'm sure someone's going to write it.
I think there are a couple hundred.
Probably about a truck too. And, when I applaud Texas Tech for doing what they're doing, it's helping put the Big 12 on the map, especially in this uncertainty portion of what's going on with Greg Sankey and his lying ways. But Kansas State, I think that they're in a really good position. When I look at this roster right now, and I talk about the momentum, last year Avery Johnson struggled at times. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. He had some moments where he was trying to take over from not only just being the new quarterback of Kansas State, but he had to be that quarterback that was not Will Howard, that was not Adrian Martinez. He had to take over Chris Kleiman's offense, and he had to do it with another new offensive coordinator, and it was a dueling head offensive coordinators between Connor Riley and Matt Wells. Now, Matt Wells is the only guy in charge. He is the only offensive coordinator, a guy that has great experience with quarterbacks in the past, Jordan Love being the main attraction to that conversation, does a really good job of play action with Love at Utah State. I think he can excel Avery Johnson into that aspect. I also think last year they had a subpar wide receiver group, and I think they really attacked that great in the portal. They might not have added the top names that you might see like other programs going after, but they added a certain trait that's something that Kansas State hasn't had in quite some time, and really maybe ever. Size. They went after size. Jared Bradley, Jaron Tips, both 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". They're big dudes. And you add that to a tight end room that led the entire country in red zone touchdowns last year, you're a dangerous threat for Avery Johnson. And if you have some potential throwing accuracy issues like you did in year one, well, that room for error might grow a little bit if you have a 6'5" wide receiver going ahead in that catching radius for your target shares. So I like where this offense is heading, Spencer. I like Dylan Edwards as my running back 1 because I think he's absolutely explosive. Jace Brown, I think, is a unit as well. I think he's an absolute dog. And although there's a lot of new players on this offensive line, I think they brought in some really interesting players that can be, NFL type material right away. JB Nelson's one of them that I look at from an immediate standpoint. Kansas State has always found a way to have a good offensive line, even if you're not talking about them. I mean, one of them is the starting center for the Dallas Cowboys right now. There's a lot of interesting things for Kansas State's offense. That will be the main attraction, though. If their offense can continue to do what they couldn't do towards the end of the season last year, if Avery Johnson can take that step forward in 2025, be the year 2 quarterback that he needs to be, not the fresh year 1 guy that's replacing Will Howard, Kansas State will be at the top of this conference.
Real quick, before I let you go, Christian, I say Avery Johnson, Heisman finalist. You say what?
I say dark horse and absolutely. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State. Hey, thanks, Spencer, for having me on. Awesome. Check out his show. He is dropping college football knowledge every single day, just like we do on Locked On Kansas State. He's doing it for the entire league. So if you want a good vision, a good view on what the daily biggest news is in college football, check out Locked On College Football for your second listen of the day. Kansas State, we can tell the season's getting closer. Week 0, just around the corner. We are less than 90 days now. It is a great feeling to know that we are very close to college football. And this week, we got some kickoff times and some TV designations for the first 4 of Kansas State games of 2025. Now, the first 4, with the exception of week 0 in Iowa State, is all the non-conference, but the first 4 games, the first quarter of the season, third of the season, if you will, is all ready to go. And we got a lot of them with night games. Interesting, right? A lot of night games to be talked about in this one. Week 0, we know, is the only one that is not a night game. They're across the pond in Dublin, Ireland, against Iowa State for Farmageddon. It's still at 11 o'clock Central Time. No matter what, still found a way to get it at 11 o'clock, but I'm okay with that. It's the first game of the college football season. It probably deserves to be at the noon Eastern spot. Start it off strong. Get week 0 going. Get those good feels on a Saturday afternoon. Yeah, I'm okay for it. I'm actually okay with that one being at 11 a.m. Central Time. But then we get into the rest of the non-conference schedule. The 3 games, North Dakota, week 1 starting. That one's in Manhattan, and that one will be at 6 o'clock. That one will be on ESPN+. It's the only one of the first 4 games for Kansas State that will not be on a national television network. ESPN+, it'll be on for that one. And it's the one where they play an FCS team. So if you're going to have one of those games where you're not in the national spotlight, that should be the one. So hopefully you should take care of them pretty easy. Now, I will say this, in the past, and we'll talk about this more in depth later on in another episode, especially as we get closer to the regular season. June's going to be a fun month, by the way. We get a lot of stuff here covered for you on Locked On Kansas State coming up next month. But North Dakota, and just really any type of FCS school, when teams play in Dublin and then they have to go and take on a non-conference or a FCS school afterwards, sometimes they struggle. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully they don't have any type of Dublin hangover, maybe not enough, maybe too much Guinness. Hopefully that doesn't happen for Kansas State in week 1, 6 o'clock Central Time for that one. Week 2, they take on Army. Again, in Manhattan. This could be another tough game. Who knows? Now, Army is seen as a rebuilding team this year. Obviously, a lot of moving parts, but they're always a tough team. Service academies are always a tough one to go against, even when they have a down year. Air Force had a down year last year. They still found a way to have tough games. Last year, Army and Navy were both very good. It's seen as a rebuilding this year. What does that mean, though? Rebuilding for Army, does that mean they're still a tough squad? You're going to have a tough game, and you're going to come out of that game feeling bumped and bruised and not excited to probably play the next week, because that's a tough game to play against those service academies. That one will also be at 6 o'clock Central Time, but on ESPN. Get that back on the national networks. So you got ESPN for week 0, ESPN Plus for week 1, and ESPN back for week 2. And to round out the non-conference schedule, you're heading out west to Arizona to take on the Wildcats, the Battle of the Wildcats. And that one will be at 8 o'clock Central. It is the late window for the Big 12. This is exactly why Brent Yormark went for teams like Arizona State and Arizona to come to the Big 12 so they could have the late schedule as a primetime Big 12 spot. And this one will also be a Friday night game, not a Saturday game. It'll be 8 o'clock Central on Fox. So this one will be not on ESPN, but on Fox. So, look, there is no reason, with the exception of the Iowa State game, because as of right now, I'm going to hold on to that being as a coin flip. Until we get closer, we've seen Iowa State, what they did last year. I'm not sure how you replace two 1,000-yard receivers, but I'll sit with them being as a coin flip. I still lean towards Kansas State, but I think that one could go either way. And I also think if you do lose that game, your season's not over. I've seen that narrative in my comments on Locked On Kansas State and across social media. I don't think the season's over. It makes it a lot more challenging, but it's not over. 2-loss team, Iowa State, made the Big 12 championship last season. But we should do just fine against North Dakota, Army, and I think Arizona is not a team that you should worry about in the Big 12 this year. I don't. They had a tough season last year. Noah Fafita couldn't step up, even with Tep McMillian as wide receiver. They did have a lot of injuries on their defensive side, and that was a big reason why they stumbled. But they moved so many players, so much in the transfer portal. Brent Brennan, I think, is already in the hot seat. Surprised he actually sticked around for year 2, if I'm being completely honest. So there is no reason why, at the very minimum, we should leave the non-conference schedule heading into true Big 12 play, if you will, getting into the meat and potatoes of the schedule at the worst 3-1. 4-0 is most definitely doable, but at the very worst 3-1, heading into UCF and TCU and Baylor and all those games. And we get to see it at night. Most of these games are going to be at night, non-conference, pretty cool, and on national network. Gotta love that. Gotta love that for sure. I'm happy. I'm happy that these are some of the games that we're going to see in a national spotlight for Kansas State. This is a perfect moment for Kansas State to show their brand yet again, especially if they start off super strong in Dublin. You're going to see them moving forward on ESPN and Fox throughout the next couple weeks. And then not only will we be able to do that for Avery Johnson, maybe that dark horse candidate becomes actually just a Heisman candidate after seeing him on a national network for so many weeks in a row. I want to leave you with this, a good feeling of college football as we head off for this episode of Locked On Kansas State. If you haven't already, do me a favor, hit subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by 4th of July here. I think that'd be a cool milestone for us at Locked On Kansas State. So if you're an everydayer or if you're just joining the adventure, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. But Mike Leach, the longtime college football head coach, is now eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. They revised the minimum career winning percentage required for coaching eligibility from .600, 60% winning percentage, to 59.5, starting with the 2027 class. Leach's winning percentage is at a 596. You round that up, it's at 600. Well-deserved. What he did for the game has been incredible. Obviously, we lost him a few years ago, but an awesome, great feeling. I saw that on social media, and I want to make sure I shared not Kansas State news, but just good college football news. If you were a fan of Mike Leach, his awesome, hilarious interviews, his press conferences, things like that, just a really awesome feeling. I'm not one for bending the rules to make sure you just fit narratives, but that one just needed to happen. Mike Leach deserves to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, and starting in 2027, he absolutely can. And I guarantee you he will be in the first time he's eligible. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening. Please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.